And now let's start with a story that continues to have a major impact on the global economy. Mediators are stepping up efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, with Iran now preparing a list of conditions for restoring normal shipping through the strategic waterway. The latest diplomatic push comes after Qatar's prime minister traveled to Tehran and urged Iranian leaders to respect freedom of navigation. Iran says the talks were constructive, but Tehran is also demanding an end of American military and economic pressure.
The trajectory of events we would like to see in Qatar is an agreement on the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which would coincide with the resumption of the ceasefire and the resumption of the talks. Are these parallel lines, converging or diverging? It's not very systematic on our end, but what I would say is that the agreement over the Strait of Hormuz would make it much easier for us to resume the talks between the United States and Iran.
Iran's Supreme National Security Council Secretary Mohsen Rezai says Tehran is preparing a list of conditions for reopening the strait. Iran has also said it has agreed with Oman on a possible shipping corridor through the waterway, with parts of the route passing through Omani and Iranian waters. But what exactly Iran will demand and whether those conditions will be acceptable to Washington remains unclear. At the same time, the United States says international shipping lanes are open. U.S. Central Command says American forces have cleared sea mines from the strait and helped hundreds of commercial vessels transit the waterway.
As recently announced, the U.S. military has achieved a major milestone in the Strait of Hormuz. We have successfully cleared sea mines in the Strait's international shipping lanes that were laid months ago by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard. The circumstances were challenging and dangerous to say the least, but we got the job done. Bottom line, today, international shipping lanes are open and momentum is building. CENTCOM forces have demonstrated time and time again that we are laser focused on this mission. We remain vigilant, lethal, and resolved.
And despite U.S. CENTCOM claims commercial vessel traffic in Hormuz remains depressed, preliminary data showed just 7 commodity vessels passed through the strait on Thursday, compared with the 10-day average of 15. And that raises some important questions here. Can diplomacy actually restore normal shipping through Hormuz? What conditions will Iran put on the table? And can Qatar and other regional mediators bridge the gap between Tehran and Washington? For the latest from Tehran, let's bring in our correspondent, Yusuf Jalali. Well, thank you, Yusuf, for joining me here on World Tonight. And let's start with the latest diplomatic activity here. So what are we hearing from Tehran about Qatar's latest visit in Iran's decision to prepare conditions for reopening the Strait of Hormuz?
Of course, pushed by regional mediators, Qatar, Pakistan, and others like have been actively pursued by regional countries. And of course, we do know that Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani visited Tehran on Thursday. He held talks with senior Iranian officials, including Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. He also visited and held talks with Mr. Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, and of course with Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. The main goal of the visit is to build on the Omani-Iranian framework for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and also to keep the diplomatic channels open to try to hopefully de-escalate the situation between Iran and the United States. What we heard coming from Iranian officials is that the Islamic Republic of Iran remains focused on its own conditions regarding the reopening, the meaningful reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. It is okay with how Iran and Oman are pursuing this temporary framework, but at the same time, Iran is sending a very strong message to the United States that the United States needs to act first before Iran goes back to the negotiating table and before any diplomatic breakthrough could take place. We heard it from Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who said he took to X to say that there's a very simple fact. The United States has to abandon pressure on Iran in order for Iran go back to the negotiating table. He said that the United States needs to lift the sanctions, it also needs to lift the naval blockade against Iran. It needs to acknowledge Iran's right and sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. So all these conditions have been repeated and reiterated by Iranian officials time and again by different Iranian authorities. And of course, this comes as the United States mounts the pressure on Iran. So in the eyes of Tehran, the United States is not serious about re-engaging in talks with Iran. And this is why we see that Iran is waiting for the United States to blink. And at the same time, the U.S. is waiting for Iran to cave. So this is a stalemate. And we see that the diplomatic effort and activities by regional mediators like Qatar, Pakistan, and Egypt and Oman, all these states have been engaged in trying to de-escalate and break this standoff.
And look, Yusuf, also Iranian officials have described the talks with Qatar as constructive. Does that suggest Iran is genuinely looking for a diplomatic solution to the crisis?
Of course, Iran is ready for dialogue. It is ready for dialogue and for any military pressure on from the United States at the same time. So Iran is holding the Strait of Hormuz for now, and Iran believes that it has the upper hand because the country continues to put pressure on traffic through the strategic Strait of Hormuz, and this is going to impact the United States at the same time. So in the eyes of Tehran, the ball is in the U.S. court. The United States and the Americans have to just try to lift the pressure, the economic pressure on Iran, and also the military pressure on all fronts, not just on Iran, but also other Iranian-backed groups in the region, like the Houthis in Yemen, like the Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So if the United States goes ahead and does so, then Iran can think about re-engaging with the United States because there's very much and deep distrust between both sides. The United States also believes that Iran is not trustworthy. But Iran has proof that the United States cannot be trusted because the United States was the first that violated talks in 2025 and recently when it was engaging in talks with Iran, it started attacking Iran. So this is why Iran says that the United States has betrayed diplomacy for several times. It cannot be trusted. It needs to provide some guarantees for Tehran that it would not violate any kind of terms highlighted in any upcoming negotiations between the two sides. So this is what Tehran is asking for, and we're waiting for the more conditions coming from the SNSC, the Supreme National Security Council of Iran, as highlighted by the Secretary of the SNSC of Iran, Mr. Mohsen Rezai. He said that Iran is drawing up a list of conditions before the country expresses readiness for dialogue with the United States.
Look, and you're just talking about the conditions, and that's on my list. So would you mind telling us, like, what kind of conditions could Tehran realistically put forward this time? Because we know Iran has previously demanded an end to sanctions and pressure. So when we're talking about right now, what could be, the realistic condition?
Well, of course, Iran has expressed its preparedness to try to re-engage in talks with the United States if the United States meets the demands, and those demands include acknowledging Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran says that the coastal states alongside the straits have the right to control traffic through this strategic choke point. This is one of the conditions, and the United States has imposed a siege on Iranian ports, that naval blockade that limits the export and import to Iran via its southern ports. So this naval blockade has left an impact on Iran's economy. And of course, we see that the United States continues to put pressure on Iran's economy by just slapping a new wave of sanctions, extensive sanctions that try to limit the export of Iranian oil. These sanctions must be lifted, not to be mounted, because we see that the United States has been ramping up the pressure economically on Iran. So among the demands is the ending of hostilities on all fronts, as I mentioned before, not just in Iran, but on its regional allies in Yemen, Hezbollah, Lebanon, and of course in Iraq, the Popular Mobilization Force. So these are the demands that we do know. These demands have been reiterated by Iranian officials on multiple occasions. But whether or not more demands would be put in place, we have to wait for the statement by the SNSC, the Supreme National Security Council of Iran, in the coming days.
All right, and look, Iran says it has agreed with Oman on a possible shipping corridor through the strait. Well, here, how significant is that proposal, and could it actually help restore commercial traffic?
Of course, it does. It does leave an impact. It potentially can reopen the strait for the inbound and outbound traffic through the strait, because Iran is basically saying that it controls the northern route of the Strait of Hormuz, that's the Iranian waters, and Oman is responsible for controlling the exit or the outbound traffic through the strait. So for now, Iran is basically saying that it also needs to have a say in the exit route as well. That's the route controlled by Oman. So it remains to be seen how Oman will just we'll see about that, because the two sides are in talks regarding the technical issues, the details of, or the geographical coordinates of the inbound and outbound lanes. So this would significantly reopen the strait, but of course that would not make Iran, or that would not leave a significant or meaningful impact on the traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. That would not bring it back to pre-crisis levels. Any meaningful reopening of the strait, as put by Tehran, is contingent upon the United States lifting all the pressure on Iran militarily and economically. And as long as the United States ignores these calls, then we're not going to be hopeful that a diplomatic breakthrough would take place.
Right, and Yusuf, well, as we know, the United States says the strait is open, but the shipping traffic remains far below the normal levels. Could you explain to our audience why are shipping companies still reluctant to use the waterway?
Well, of course, Iran is not closing and has not closed the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is merely saying that the Strait of Hormuz is not safe for the vessels that right now try to bypass, or what they call violate, Iran's warnings or Iran's arrangement for the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has set some certain geographical coordinates with the help of Oman, jointly trying to just reopen the strait or reopen the navigation for commercial vessels. And this does not mean that military vessels have the permission to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. That's just for the commercial vessels. But of course, the reason why you see that the shipping traffic through this choke point has reduced or has been reduced as a result of Iran's warnings is that Iran has now set some certain routes for the passing or for the passage of those ships. And if those ships ignore those arrangements by Iran and now by Oman as well, jointly, then those ships would be attacked by the IRGC's Navy. And we saw several such occasions taking place, or such incidents taking place in the past. So ships are now worried about just violating or ignoring Iran's calls or Iran's arrangement for the Strait of Hormuz. So this is why you see that the traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has been reduced. But of course, Iran has sent some assurances for commercial ships that pass through this route, which has been devised or designed by Iran and Oman. And in the coming days, between 30 to 60 days, Iran and Oman would announce a new route to the shipping, regarding the shipping lanes. And these 30 to 60 days, we have to wait for the two countries to come up with a permanent solution to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. But again, that does not mean that the Strait of Hormuz would return, or traffic through the Strait of Hormuz would return to pre-crisis level.
Right, well, thank you, Yusuf, so much for joining me here on World Tonight, and thanks for the analysis time.